Ukraine's president says Russian troops have attacked a nuclear power station in Ukraine. Video shows flames and smoke engulfing the Zaporizhia power plant. Ukrainian officials say shelling on the plant began early Friday morning local time. President Zelensky called on the global community to put pressure on Vladimir Putin to end the attack. The nuclear station is the largest of its kind in Europe. It's responsible for 25% of Ukraine's power generation. Despite the facility coming under fire, the White House says there's no indication of elevated radiation levels. A week into its invasion, Russia's military has increased its attacks on cities and civilians across Ukraine. Moscow says it has also captured Kherson, a port city in southern Ukraine. At least 33 people were killed in airstrikes Thursday in Chernihiv, Ukraine. That's a residential area home to more than 285,000 people. Officials say 2 schools were hit in the attack, as well as private buildings. Ukrainian officials say more than 2,000 civilians were killed over the last week. Russia, meanwhile, says almost 500 of its troops have died. The United Nations reports 1 million people have fled Ukraine. For more on all of this, I want to bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Ian Lee and CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight. Ian, I want to start with you. What more can you tell us about what is happening at this power plant?
Nikki, this is one of the most frightening developments, not only for Ukraine, but for all of Europe. A fire has broken out at Europe's largest nuclear power plant, according to a local official. Earlier this evening, the area had come under heavy shelling by Russian troops. Ukraine's Atomic Energy Ministry says firefighters couldn't reach the blaze because they were being shot at point-blank range. The situation is now believed to be under control, but the UN's nuclear watchdog is calling for workers to be left alone and for the firefighters and the fighting around the area to stop. This power plant provides 25% of the country's electricity, and Ukrainian officials predict a nuclear disaster here has the potential to be 10 times worse than the one at Chernobyl. President Biden has also spoken with President Zelensky about the situation at the facility, while U.S. officials say they're monitoring the situation and trying to figure it out. So far, and this is the good news, there hasn't been any reported changes in the radiation levels, Nikki.
We'll take any good news on this for sure. And if you can just give us a little bit of context about Zaporizhia, what the area is like, civilians that may live on that, anything you can give a little context about its role in Ukraine at large.
Well, yeah, this is a area right on the Dnieper River. It's just north of the Crimea, and this is where we've seen Russian troops move up in their advances throughout the country. And Ukrainian officials have said that they kind of wanted a buffer zone around their nuclear power facilities because they pose such a potential risk, not only to Ukraine, but for the rest of Europe. And this is just one of them and the largest one. But despite all of that, there has been heavy fighting in that area. And that's what's drawn so much concern, not just from Ukrainian officials, but international officials as well. And the IAEA, that nuclear watchdog, is trying to reach out to all parties involved to try to get them to stop fighting. But this is just part of Russia's invasion of the country to kind of push in deeper into Ukraine.
Weijia, I want to turn to you. We know that President Biden spoke on the phone with Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky. What are you hearing about their conversation?
Pretty much what you guys have already laid out. I mean, sources are not going to go beyond what they put in this readout, obviously, because of how sensitive this situation is right now. But certainly the president, once again, sided with President Zelensky in urging some way for Putin to stop this. But I think what's really important here is what it shows, and it shows how unhinged Putin is, because you're exactly right. This is about much more than just Ukraine at this point. Zelensky said as much in a video address as he urged Europeans to contact their politicians, to contact their elected officials, and to say this must stop. How will this stop? It's not going to be the sanctions, at least he believes, that have already been imposed on Russia. And so he is urging essentially for Europe and underneath that for the U.S. to do more to to stop these Russian aggressions. And how do you do that? That's by intervening in the airspace, because we know that they were shooting at this power plant. And the president has already said that is not going to happen. However, this is very different because it is something that could have such an impact across the world. And so the White House says that the president continues to closely monitor this. He has been in touch with national nuclear experts and will continue to see what's happening there. But as Ian pointed out, the good news is that at this point it does not appear the radiation levels have heightened around this, because there are residential neighborhoods nearby. And of course, it could have a tremendous ripple effect. But again, this just shows how far Putin is willing to go, despite yet another round of extreme sanctions that went into a place today. So that's why you hear Ukrainians, that's why you hear Zelensky saying, obviously it's not enough. Where is the red line? And what does Putin have to do in order for NATO and the U.S. to change its view about how they are going to respond to Putin?
Certainly the entire world is already watching this war, but I think when we hear nuclear power plant and see these images, it just raises even more alert around the country. Political leaders, people, everyone is watching this so closely. Ian, delegates from Russia and Ukraine held another round of peace talks Thursday. Can you tell us what the latest on the negotiations is, and when are officials expected to meet again?
And Nikki, there was some progress today. Officials from Ukraine and Russia agreed to implement a limited ceasefire in order to create humanitarian corridors to evacuate civilians. Right now, Kharkiv, with nearly 1.5 million people, and Mariupol, with less than 500,000 people, are under siege and constant bombardment. The mayor of Kharkiv says the situation is extremely difficult, while describing artillery and missiles hitting residential neighborhoods. One video showed an apartment block roughly 10 stories high, completely blown in half. Of course, this is causing heavy civilian casualties. So Ukrainian officials are eager to help people trapped in those cities escape. But this is a double-edged sword that we saw the Russians do in Syria. Once civilians are believed to have left, Russia can then step up its bombardment. The negotiators will meet again for a third round of talks next week. We also heard a challenge today from President Zelensky, calling out Putin, saying he wants one-to-one talks with the Russian president, and even asked what he's scared of. Putin, on the other hand, seems determined to go all the way, according to French officials, who warn the worst is yet to come. Nikki?
Ian, you mentioned President Zelensky, and he's become such an interesting figure in this, and really, I think, for his own country, certainly a hero as he stays there and fights, on the ground himself. We saw that Zelensky held a meeting with some of the press today in a very carefully orchestrated way, surrounded by sandbags in windows and security guards with assault-style rifles. What do you take away from that meeting? What sort of message do you think President Zelensky is saying, and even conducting it? And what does he symbolize now, do you think, to Ukrainians?
The interesting thing is we've seen a lot of leaders around the world give their, speeches about the situation in Ukraine. But Zelensky today, he just pulled up a chair to the press, sat down, and just started answering questions, kind of like a fireside chat. And he fielded questions across the spectrum. Was he scared of dying? Was he going to flee the country? Answers where he said, no, he's going to stay there. He's going to fight. He's proud of his people. But there was anger as well. He wants a no-fly zone over Ukraine. That's something that Western officials, NATO officials, have ruled out because they feared that it could escalate the situation where you have NATO troops and Russian troops in full confliction, where it could start a nuclear war, and that's something they don't want. But he said, if you're not going to have that no-fly zone, then give me the weapons that I can use to shoot down Russian planes, shoot down Russian helicopters. So he wants more support from the West, from NATO. But also one thing is that he is concerned about civilian casualties, and that's something where we saw this negotiations where they have these humanitarian corridors where civilians can leave. That's something that is also very important to him. But he was also asked about, is he now a symbol? You know, he has become somewhat of a symbol in the West as a strong leader who's standing up against an invasion, against an authoritarian regime, and as a strong image. And he kind of laughed it off. But, you know, he is well aware of what his presence in the country means to the people and to the morale of the soldiers on the front line as they continue to take on the Russians.
It is remarkable to see, and certainly I just want to note the casualties of civilians is really the most, gut-wrenching and heartbreaking part of all this, particularly the children. Weijia, I want to turn back to you. The Biden administration, we know, has issued a number of sanctions in response to Russia's invasion. What's the latest on those economic measures, and could this attack on the nuclear plant trigger further action, do you think?
The problem is that even the administration has said that sanctions are not an immediate solution. Just last week when President Biden delivered an address about what he was doing about the U.S. response, he himself said, let's talk in a month about how these sanctions are doing. A month is quite a while, and a lot can happen between then and in a matter of 3 or 4 weeks even. I mean, look at what has evolved just tonight. And so that is why Ukrainians are very publicly saying, Ukrainian officials, I should clarify, that they need to do more, because even those sanctions could ultimately have a very negative impact on the Russian economy and certainly on these Russian individuals, including, well, maybe Putin himself, because he has been sanctioned. That's not going to be immediate. It's not going to stop the Russian forces that are attacking Ukraine in this moment. And as far as sanctioning Putin himself, the problem with that is that he has done such a stellar job of burying his wealth and his assets that there's really no way to tell exactly where it is or the extent of it. And so you have to wonder what he has at stake personally. Of course, sanctions will ultimately have an effect on the people, already has, of the civilians there in Russia, but to what extent he's willing to go to get what he wants is the big question. And I think the fear is that it's just not enough. But again, short of that, and short of continuing to supply resources to Ukraine, money to Ukraine so they can defend themselves, it's difficult to really know what more NATO and the U.S. can do, considering that they have drawn such a black and white line between how much they're willing to get involved.
You mentioned a month certainly does seem like an incredibly long time away, especially given this past week that has felt like an eternity, and can't imagine what it's felt like for all of the Ukrainians there. Ian Lee and Weijia Jiang, thanks so much for your time and your reporting.